Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Good evening /X/ I've come to share my stories with you. I will preface my tales by shedding light on my current state. Lately I've not been myself, depressed and overwhelmed in a sense. Over time my thoughts of these events are growing upon me in some sort of fatal conclusion, as if my subconscious can sense a swelling climax of this processed information. I will be honest, I feel sharing this information is the only way to release the pressure it's causing in my brain. I need to get this off my chest. It began 10 years ago on Christmas. At the time I was staying with my mother and her boyfriend, let us call him Tom, whose family we had been visiting to share in the holiday cheer. The merry morning began like any other, with the shredding of presents brought to my sister and I, while our half-awake parental figures sipped their coffee and clung to consciousness. I visited my father's house briefly before being ushered to a cocktail party at Tom's parents' house. All was well up until about midnight when they packed my sister and I back into the minivan. Both my mother and Tom have a serious drinking problem, and a bonus is that neither of them are very friendly when intoxicated. I could feel a sense of fear for them driving the 13 blocks back home, even more than they had been arguing. I was pretending not to listen, switching my view from my baby sister obliviously sleeping to counting the blocks during their increasing volume. Simple fear became panic as I saw them focus more on their hatred for one another and less upon the road ahead of them. It was an odd sequence after that, one that I might come close to calling an out-of-body experience. I could see my mother lift one hand off of the wheel and turn to strike Tom for one of his comments, but instead of watching the assault, I seemed to be looking past it, to the poorly lit asphalt ahead. For lack of explanation, although I knew well what I was looking at, I couldn't see it. Instead, I saw a different scene play out over reality, a vision that plainly told me the minivan would crash through the flimsy barricade and plunge us all into a watery grave. I had snapped back into reality just in time to see Tom angrily grab the wheel and yank it towards him. The van started to spin and I was thrust against my seatbelt. I was overcome with terror at the all-clear sign. I did not want to die. I did not want my now awake and screeching little sister to die. This was not my greatest idea, I will admit that, but I was young at the time and could not think of anything better. I remember howling at the top of my lungs, over their yelling and my sister's wailing, over the unruly screech of the tires and unfavorable groans of the automobile. More than likely the stupidest thing I've ever done. I pulled the car door back and jumped out of the spinning vehicle. After this stupid moment, the rest of the sequence played out in bits and pieces. I lost consciousness when I hit the ground, but rolled about 35 feet across a parkway, to be clear, one side of a figurative highway to another. There are 3 things that I remember witnessing, and 2 things that were told to me later on. 1. 2 women had been jogging alongside the parkway at nearly 1 in the morning on Christmas and witnessed the event. They rushed to my side as the van reeled its way after me. It seemed to pass through them, but not through my left leg. 2. The same 2 women argued with my mother for a bit and demanded she call an ambulance. 3. I know for a fact my mother did not call an ambulance. Instead, she whisked me away to my father's house. That night, I went in and out in my bedroom due to the pain and shock of the ordeal. Many times when I stared into my room, it was empty and dark, but one instance it was not. The difference was barely noticeable, but I swear on my life that the final time I opened my eyes, there stood in the center of the room a silhouette. Undefined, for it had no visible frame of face, but it was most certainly humanoid. As I stared, I felt a feeling that was not to me, but around this figure, a sadness that enveloped it. A few moments had passed and the figure lifted a single finger to what I could make out as its face. Shh, and just like that it was gone. The next morning my father told me 2 things. 4. My mother had left me on the porch. 5. He came outside to find 2 women standing just outside the gate of our yard calling out to me. Accounting for the 2 bits of information my father gave me, admitting as well that it scared the shit out of him, the following day for me had been spent both engrossed in the aftermath as well as making sense of the chaos. I had begged my father to call and ask about my sister, who I later found out had been dropped at our grandmother's house a few streets away. There was a bit of relief in that, but I wanted to see her and be sure of it myself. I was denied that comfort because my father was panicked and didn't want me to leave my bed. It was reasonable considering my leg. I stated that it did indeed get run over, and due to the weight of the van, it should have either been ripped off my body or at least crushed into a pile of bone meal and meat. The next morning, the only evidence of injury was that my leg from knee to toe was completely black and blue. I don't remember ever seeing a doctor for it, or even getting something rational from a medical professional. My leg, and that night soon faded out of everyone's memory, but not mine. For me, it was the beginning of a decade of insanity. You see, over the years and many encounters with stated insanity, I've formed my own opinions of the matter. Maybe someone here can shed a bit of insight or light to it. My conclusion from both a logical and spiritual standing has gotten me through and used to the encounters. I believe I was supposed to die that night /X/me and everyone else in that minivan. My stupid actions changed that outcome, and now I'm stuck in a limbo of sorts. I feel the reason of my living state is based on my inability to accept my demise that night. I did not consciously think that it would save us, only that I wanted to put a stop to it. They were forced to be spared. Shall I continue on about my next encounters? Anyway, the next encounter came about a year and a half after that night, sometime in January after passing back between living with my father to my mother again. I was home early from school with an excuse of not feeling well. My mother knew better and had me do chores to make it up. One of the last things she requested was to walk her devil dog. Just a few blocks from our house was a nice little vintage 1960s apartment complex. The structure itself took to age in a pretty way, but the inhabitants of the apartments had not. Rumors of sketchy dealings had surrounded the place for years. Some housewives armed with brow-beaten city council members had many plans to clear out the place and turn it into anything considered moral. When I passed the building, it seemed peaceful. I lost myself in thought when a voice took me out of it. "How are you feeling?" I was caught off guard when the two women approached me. I delayed in my auto, "I'm fine, how are you?" thinking she was a neighbor that my mother knew. I saw them exchange a look before settling back on me. I was kind of spooked by it. Their movements seemed to be a mirror of one another, in both gesture and expression. "You should run along now," said one before. "But be careful," said the other near immediately. The statements ran consecutively. I was glad for the opening to walk away, and made a turn around them while pulling the dog too. They never took their eyes from me as I carried on down the walk. Later on, when passing by on my way home, couldn't have been 10 minutes later, an ambulance was parked outside the complex. They were wheeling out a covered body on a stretcher and loading it into the emergency vehicle, but not so much in a hurry. I stared at the scene for a moment, kind of oblivious to the vibes I was getting from the air of death, when something caught my eye. In my peripheral vision, I saw an undefined silhouette calmly exiting the complex after the stretcher. The figure seemed to be dusting its hands calmly before approaching the ambulance. It simply climbed on board after the paramedics and off they went down the road, without sirens. A few thoughts occurred to me at that moment, mostly that there were no sirens because of course there was no urgency. That person was not alive nor had any hope of being revived. It was a slow-coming thought to me. That person was dead. Another thought, or more of a feeling, was that I had seen familiar faces. The women and the figure reached down into my subconscious and pulled back to the surface what had been explained over time as mere trauma or shock. 3 blocks back home, I rediscovered that night in detail and spent a few days in recluse with it. A lot of questions went unanswered, things unexplained. Over time, they faded to a certain degree. Things went back to normal for a month or two. It seemed as though, at least back then, that whenever I had just returned to normal, something happened that forced me to reanalyze again. After those months, a strange pattern of uncharacteristic loss ensued, never mapped out in time but similar in circumstance. It's a scary thing to get used to see a sign or notion and expect death to come along shortly. The two were the forewarning, the figure the passing. At first, it was Cheryl down the block who had a stroke in the late morning. Her husband had told us she went outside to get the mail, chatted with some joggers, and returned to drop dead in the hall. The ambulance came to collect her, and the wake was held 2 weeks after. 3 weeks after our grandmother's neighbor informed her that her grandson Daniel died in a car accident the night before, my mother's community visit shed light to the gossip. I watched 2 women bring flowers to Daniel's grandmother to express condolences. They had been there the morning of his death, thumping Bibles, my grandmother had told us. A day later, my father's landlords, Taylor and Marie, passed away of old age. I went for my weekend stay and watched their children come and collect belongings from a storage they kept on the property. 2 women had come to lend a hand and finished discussing another property now under the children's ownership. This continued rapidly over 6 months, all without any sense of timing. It came and went, silently and overheard by the adults around me. Information passed on so nonchalantly by them and harvested by me for little facts and lilts of light. To be honest /x/nothing came of my constant picking. I feel that I'm willing to accept anything but the truth in this matter. We aren't meant to know. We aren't meant to understand. Over the years, I've done just about everything I could do to escape the silent air of death that never tired in my presence. The farther I go, the closer to home it strikes. I've lost many loved ones along the way, those that I only meant to protect and save. Nearly 10 years now since that night that started it all. I'm tired /x/, so very tired. I'm glad I chose to share my tales with you, the paranormal fanatics, the unnatural dwellers. It is in writing a tangible evidence of my existence to you that I find a shred of peace. I think I'm ready to accept it now. Godspeed.
My hometown has always been pretty creepy. Only half of it has streetlights. We have plenty of old and abandoned buildings, including a schoolhouse and a church. There's 2 woods, one right next to the elementary school, and we've had a lot of oddly large animals around here. All the strays look like they're well-fed house pets. I've seen this huge albino bat, and we've never really thought anything of it. Why would we? It hadn't been a problem until now. I hope they clear-cut that woods out by the school. I've never been a believer, but something simply is not right with that place. Out behind the elementary school that I used to go to there is this wooded area. It's not too big, but it's not exactly small either, and tree lines spread from it to separate all the farmers' fields. I remember being frightened of it when I was a kid, but I never really thought about why. Hell, I've had strange fears of other things. Maybe there is more to that old closet or that tub than I had thought. I'm straying from the point. Maybe I'm just too nervous or afraid to face it. I'll try, but it's hard. You'll soon know why. Back when I was still in high school, a couple of friends and I went out into the woods. We were just dicking around out there. There isn't exactly a whole lot to do out here. If I recall correctly, we were gathering sticks to wail on each other with. It's stupid, I know. We went in there pretty deep. One of my friends had found a clearing, and we figured that would be as good a place as any to start our stick fighting. We had our fun until one of us, we'll call him Jay, tripped over something. It was some sort of cross, it looked like. It looked like maybe someone had buried a pet there. There was no grass in that spot, and that little cross was made of sticks. We found a plastic bag nearby full of clothes, though. I still don't know what the hell was up with that. We've also found some weird abandoned house thing out there. It's hard to describe. It looks like half a trailer, with parts of it replaced with plywood and scrap metal. Never did find anything in there, though. So that woods has always been pretty fucked, but that's nothing compared to what's been going on lately. It started a couple of months ago. Remember all those big strays I mentioned? There was one that I would always see out by this trail near my house. He was a friendly mutt, but he always seemed to be frightened of people. I think maybe he had been abused. A couple of months ago, he just stopped showing up. He's done that before, but it had never been longer than a couple of days that I wouldn't see him. After that, I noticed we had fewer and fewer of those strays around. Hell, I haven't seen that bat, come to think of it. I didn't really think much of it. That was a mistake. There's this telephone pole that people always put flyers up on. Garage sales, missing pets, that sort of thing. It's absolutely covered in nails. I don't know how people can keep putting signs up. Within weeks, it was absolutely covered, though. Help us find our dogs. Missing cat. Reward offered. Have you seen me? These printer paper signs dominated that pole and the one opposite it at the intersection. It was clear something was up. The local police weren't really doing much, though they did say they would be on the lookout. It wasn't until a month later that they decided to actually do anything, and by then it was too late. I was on my way to a friend's house that night when I saw it. I nearly passed by the pole like it was nothing, but something caught my attention from my peripheral. There was a new sign up, but it wasn't for someone's missing pet. The sign read, "Have you seen our daughter?" At the top there was a lot of information crammed on that piece of paper, and of course a picture of the poor little girl. She was the sweetest looking kid. I couldn't help but feel my heart drop when I read that sign. When I got to my friend's house, I asked if he had heard anything about it. He said he knew the family. We decided we would help look with the little makeshift search party they formed. She lived fairly close to the elementary, so we figured the woods would be the best place to start. Maybe she hurt herself playing out there. Or, well, if it was something worse, we figured the woods would be where someone that sick would go. We grabbed our flashlights and went out there. Nothing could have prepared us for what we were about to witness, and I doubt I can ever set foot in those woods again. Hell, I'm saving up to move as far away from this hellhole as I can. We went out to where Jay had tripped so long ago. Figured that was as good a starting place as any. I remember it clearly. It was a clear night, nice and cold. We could see our breath easily, and we had the moonlight the whole night. It was maybe an hour or so into our search. We had gotten pretty deep into those woods, out past the cross, out past the old trailer, and we still hadn't found anything. We were feeling like turning back around, but decided to keep going. Oh, how I wish we had been weak. Another hour passed in our search. We went deeper into those woods than we thought it went. I could have sworn it was smaller than this, or maybe we just got lost. We couldn't see any of the streetlights, we couldn't see the school, and we couldn't see any of the fields. I noticed a lot of spider webs. It seemed like we were coming across deeper into the woods we went. By this point, they were everywhere, and the spiders were huge. They weren't tarantula-sized, but these were damn big. This thick, sugary sweet smell became thicker the further we went too. My friend pointed something out, pointed his light at it. It looked like a lump in the ground, covered in leaves and webs. We went over to it, and I nearly threw up when he brushed the leaves and webs aside. It was that pit bull that used to come around my house, but I could barely recognize him. His fur was patchy, his skin was pale and paper white, and it looked like he hadn't been eating. We were both obviously freaking out at this point. Who wouldn't be? There was no way all these little spiders could have caught and killed such a big dog. We thought maybe there was someone in our town seriously fucked in the head. If only that was the case. We decided we would just let the police handle this. We didn't exactly come armed and didn't want to risk running into some psychotic child-abducting pit bull-killing freakout in these woods at night. So we turned back, at least. We thought we did. It was obvious we were lost at this point. We couldn't shake that smell either. It was getting so bad I could barely stand it. We walked for what felt like another hour and a half. Then we saw it. It was something I know will never leave my mind, and it's something that I feel might have changed my entire worldview. My flashlight's beam fell upon something out there. It was black and shiny, and as soon as the beam of light hit it, it sunk into the shadows. I thought maybe I was just seeing things. It was dark out, and I was clearly stressing out. I feel like I might be better off being a schizo than living through this. We kept moving, and I kept seeing things in my peripheral, shadows darting about between the trees. I kept telling myself it was nothing, until we saw what may have been the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. You know what that means. I'm posting this on 4chan. You know the things I've seen. It was a massive spiderweb. Absolutely huge. It dominated our vision. It seemed like there must have been tens of thousands of spiders in that web. A swarm of those shiny black bodies. They were all still, waiting. All around us were lumps similar to where we found that stray, and we could see the webs were thick with what you would expect spiders to catch. At least we wouldn't have a moth problem. Out of pure shock, it seemed like days before I could feel my legs and tell them to run. I was completely awestruck. Our flashlights danced across the huge web, spotting so many lumps that could not have been insects. There were hundreds the size of a fist, and against a tree. That's where we found her. It was hard to recognize her form as human, covered in those webs and leaves, but it was clearly her face. It looked like she had been completely drained. Her cheeks were taut against her teeth. You could practically see them through the flesh. Her eyes were missing. It was like they had been consumed entirely. I couldn't hold back the vomit when I saw that. I absolutely could not. The sweet smell was so thick around her, and the sight was so gruesome, I felt like I emptied everything on the ground in an instant. I think I may have popped a vessel in my eye. It was so forceful. I ran. I've never run so hard in my life. I ran and I ran. I knew I had to get as far away from there as I could. I couldn't even think I was in such shock. It was like something primal had taken over. I was running on nothing but adrenaline and instinct at that point. My feet hit the ground hard. It was the only sound I remember hearing. Thump, thump, thud, crunch. That is, until I heard him scream. Hearing that snapped me back into consciousness. It was an awful scream, something guttural, and I could feel his fear in it. I stopped, looked around. My flashlight caught glimpses of the web and shiny black carapace, but I could not see him. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't yell for him. I pointed my light where I heard the scream from, and nothing. I could not see him, his light, nothing. I saw something out there, though. It was like trees were moving. They moved with inhuman grace between the others. Then I saw it. It was a spider the size of a damn truck. I could feel my face growing pale. I think I may have pissed even. I ran and I didn't stop until I knew I was back at my home. I was completely exhausted. I got right in the shower and turned the water on. I had to wash that experience away. I had to clean myself of that fear. I lied down in that water for hours. My legs were twitching like mad, like I had run a damn marathon. I don't know what the hell is going on out there in those woods, but I do know I'm never going there again. I can't look his family in the face. I'm so ashamed.
Thought I would share my story and pictures here about an antique shop I encountered during my stay in the state of Maine. My brother lives in the complete middle of nowhere in Maine. I came up to visit him and see his new house in this old town called Morrill. Now this town was extremely small and extremely remote. He had just bought this house with his fiancée for an insanely low price due to the location. Well, anyways, me and him are watching TV when his girlfriend walks in. She says that her friend told her there was a family-owned antique store on the edge of town, and we should go check it out. So we all piled into the car and went to find it. We couldn't find it anywhere, and GPS was no help. So eventually we stopped at a general store and asked for directions. The guy at the front tells us it's down an old road with no signs or any indication whatsoever that there was anything down that road. We finally found it. This huge barn that was converted into a house store, with only 2 people maintaining the entire thing. The lady at the desk was clearly not right in the head. She had this extremely wide smile on her face, and the front of her shirt was drenched in what I could only guess was drool. She looked to be in her late 60s and spoke very loudly. "We come to our shop!" She literally screamed. The 3 of us just kind of slowly wandered away from her to look around, and that's when shit got creepy. In one room there were a bunch of paintings and mannequins with skulls for heads. They gave off this odd gas-like smell. The entire building had a strange smell to it. Not bad, but not good. The mannequins wore pretty modern-day clothes, which was surprising considering it's an antique shop. Suddenly, the lady from the front desk rushed over and hugged one of the mannequins. No. These clothes are not for sale. He would be cold without clothes." She looked like she was going to cry. It was awkward and creepy as hell. The second room was filled with a lot of glass furniture and lamps. I noticed near the center of the room there was a doll sealed in a glass casing. The entire area around the doll smelled like a porta potty. It was so bad we had to cover our noses. Yet again the old lady came up to us to talk. The smell is what keeps him in there. Confused and creeped out, I decided to ask what she meant, and what she told me didn't help the situation. He would get out and run around and cause such a mess. So we found a smell he hated and sprayed it everywhere so he wouldn't get out of his case. During the whole time she was talking about it, she kept inhaling sharply through her nose, like she enjoyed the god-awful strong smell. It was not only creepy, but insanely gross. The final room we went into was the worst of all. The moment we walked into the room, we were overwhelmed with one of the worst smells I could honestly say I've ever smelt in my life. It smelled like dead and rotting flesh. The smell was so overpowering that my brother's girlfriend had to leave and go outside. Inside the room, there wasn't anything too odd. Old rugs on the wall, some old paintings and clothes, and that's when we saw it. Hung on the wall in the corner of the room was a rotting, very poorly taxidermied deer hung on the wall. The teeth were rotting and giving off the worst smell. I stayed long enough to snap a picture and just bolted out of there. Never went back. Hope you guys enjoyed this little story. Also, the second person running the shop was nowhere to be seen. We were just told there were two, but never saw the second person.
I've never really read into it much, but I'll share my story about the time I stayed at my friend's house years ago, who was into summoning and reading into all this sort of stuff. We were teenagers, around 16 to 18. I was 17 at the time. 3 of us, my friend A, my other friend B and me. We all slept round his after a few beers in separate rooms. A was in his bedroom, B was downstairs in the living room, and I was in A's old bedroom, which we called the black room, since its walls were all painted black. When I slept, I had a horrific nightmare of being lost in a dark wood during the dream. A map, or so I thought of it, kept strobe lighting into my vision. After the forest sequence, I found myself free-falling towards a pile of corpses, hundreds of them which were screaming. I had the choice of killing my friend, who I was falling with, by landing on him or letting him live and me dying. I chose in my dream to land on him and woke up after realizing what I'd done upon impact. When I woke, I was in absolute terror, and in the doorway was a very clear silhouette of a tall woman facing away from me in an almost burqa-like outfit, completely in black head to toe. I stared for what felt like ages in absolute terror. Then her head started to turn, as though she was turning towards me. I got out of the bed and sprinted past her and headed downstairs. I woke friend B and told him about what I saw, and he looked terrified. He didn't say any more and let me sleep on the other sofa. I didn't sleep that night, necked 3 pints of water in fear. In the morning, I told friend A about what I saw and the map which I saw. He asked me, draw it. I drew it out and he promptly found his book about this sort of stuff and opened it at a page of the demon he supposedly summoned in that room. It was a perfect match. It sounds stupid and it reads stupid, but that's what happened. There was something in that doorway, and the image from my dream mapped perfectly to the thing he used to summon it. Friend B later recalled that he had witnessed the same level of terror and horrible nightmares in the black room. B was not awake in the morning when me and A did the drawing comparison.
Hey/X/first-time poster here. I wanted to share a ghost story my grandpa told me as a kid. Not as a tale, but as a thing that happened. Something that he has kept as a truth, way into my adult life. To set the scene, my grandpa lives in the Finnish countryside, a bit in the woods, has neighbors and regular traffic, although minimal. There's an old barn between his land and the neighbors. Sometimes, especially at evenings and nights, you could hear a loud, persistent banging noise from the barn. The first few times it puzzled him, but he thought the neighbor had done some work there. One day, the neighbor asked him if he'd heard banging from the barn and if he'd been the culprit. After a discussion and realizing what was what, obviously thinking someone was messing with them, they decided to check it out together the next time it happened. The next time it happened, they met up and made their way to the barn. As the banging got louder and louder, they were at the open doorway and checked the barn to realize it was empty. In shock and awe, my grandpa said, "Satana, Satan," which is a common Finnish curse word, and the banging stopped. Since that moment, the banging has completely stopped and is yet to come back. Later, they theory crafted and came to the conclusion it had something to do with the fact that in the war with Russia, the barn was used to store fallen troops. I've asked my father about it later on. He was a kid at the time, and he recalls the banging sound vividly. I'm not sure if I believe in the paranormal, but I'm inclined to believe them at least somewhat. If you have stories told to you as a true thing that happened, do tell. Anyhow, thanks for reading and have a nice day and night. So another one from my grandpa that just came to me. To set the scene, it's the same place from the earlier one. They live in a small cottage. It's fall, and the nights are pitch black. It's night, and he's trying to sleep. A bit after falling asleep, my grandma wakes him up. "Can you hear that?" "Hear what?" "That scratching noise." After coming to a bit, he noticed the sound and went to the kitchen window. The scratching stops and he sees nothing. The next few nights it's the same until it changed to knocking on the windows. Now he was alarmed. He went out to search but found nothing. The next time it happened, he went out again. Turns out it was the village madman doing God knows what or why. Fun fact, he later died under weird circumstances, maybe due to shenanigans like that.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.